Hey, what's up, y'all? So this video is me articulating how to actually get what you want out of your connections. So you have a Zoom call scheduled with a friend next week, or a walk scheduled with a friend. How do you make that experience as fulfilling as possible? Just because I've put a lot of thought and practice into this, and I think there's some valuable information I can convey. I think the standard type of connection is you are meeting with someone, let's say you have an hour planned, and you just show up and you just start talking. And you just are both hoping that the conversation is going to somehow find its way into a place that is fulfilling and enjoyable for the both of you. I would say that is standardly how connections work. Show up and just kind of hope it turns out well. What I've found is that sometimes that works, and most of the time it doesn't, at least for me. Most of the time, like, if I'm in a conversation, like, it'll often steer into territory that doesn't feel good or interesting, and I need to figure out how to steer it out. Or there will be something that'll happen where, like, I'll either get very subtly triggered or feel insecure in a very subtle way and not have space to speak it up, and so then it's just kind of like bleeding through the interaction and continuing to not totally get to where I wanted to. Last week, I just had 3 connections in a row, I guess 4 in a row, that were all incredibly fulfilling and diverse, and each felt like an adventure in its own right. I've come to find it useful to view connections as an adventure. So I'm not just showing to talk with this person on Zoom, I'm showing up to meet them, find our mutual desires, and flow into an adventure together. So just to convey like what I mean when I say that, and why I think that framework is useful before I even get to the 5 tips, is because if I'm viewing a connection as an adventure instead of a conversation, then it opens up what is possible to happen and what we can do together. So for example, last week, one friend I met with, and first we just made eye contact for 2 minutes in silence. And then he held space for me as I was processing some stuff about our relationship. And then we both gave a life update for a while, and then we both took turns asking each other questions. It was very fulfilling. It was like what we needed. And then I had another connection the next day where the first thing we did was we took turns making sounds and noise, 10 each. So first I went, based on what we were feeling. So first I was like, right now I'm just feeling like, ah. And then they were like, I'm feeling, bah. And then I was like, now I'm feeling, mm. And so anyways, it was just like a fun and playful way to express what was happening in our inner worlds, move some energy, and just sync up with each other. And then in that connection after that, we just tried something new where we set a timer, and every 10 minutes the timer would go off, and we would pause our conversation wherever it was at. We would take a step back and each just report how we were feeling in that moment. And I found that incredibly useful, which I will touch on later. And then later that day I had a connection with another friend, and first thing we did, we met up. I was holding space for him, he was working through something, and then we did some Wim Hof breath work for like 10 minutes. And then we witnessed each other expressing anger and then talked about it. And that was it. And the reason I bring all that up is because like those were 3 very diverse connections. Some were emotional, some were intellectual, some were embodied. But they were all collaborative adventures. And for me, they were much more interesting than just show up and talk and hope it goes somewhere good. So the 5 principles that I want to lay out that I've found super useful to make connections fulfilling. First one is, if you have a connection at 5 p.m., show up at 4:50 by yourself and set intentions. What do you want to get out of the experience? What do you want to bring into the experience? You can do that however you want. For me, I will, every time I have a call, I will show up before and I will write down 3 words. So for example, the words might be like curiosity, groundedness, open-heartedness. And that's just kind of a combination of what I'm wanting to bring, what I'm wanting to get out, what I want the vibe to be. So I'll write down those 3 words at the corner of my page. I always have a notebook, and I'll just write it down. And then, for me personally, I'll actually do a prayer to the muses, whatever the muses are. Read about the muses in a book by Stephen Pressfield called The War of Art. Would highly recommend that book for overcoming creative blocks, but that's neither here nor there. So I'll just show up, I'll write down my 3 words, and I'll actually say a prayer. I'll go like this, and I'll say, Dear muses, I'm meeting with Sam in 10 minutes, and I want to ask that you help me create the most enjoyable and impactful experience for both of us by channeling my gifts to be curious, grounded, and open-hearted, and that we can co-create a connection that is fulfilling for both of us. And that's pretty much what I'll say. And then I'll just kind of meditate or ground for the rest of the time before. I guess I'll say, I don't even know if I believe that these muses exist anywhere. They might just be in my imagination, and I'm totally fine with that. The thing that's happening, though, is like I'm sitting down, setting an intention, and like putting it outside of myself. And for me, it's useful to personify these muses who inform creative acts, because I do view connection as a creative act. Every time you're meeting with a person, you are collaborating on a co-creation of connection, and you don't know what it's going to be or where it's going to go, and the hope is that it's a connection that is creatively giving you both what you want. So, first thing, however you want to do it, that's just my style, but however you want to do it, I think it's useful to write intentions before. Second thing, once you meet with the person, the first question I always ask is, do you have any hard time boundaries? I think it's useful to just know what time container we're playing in. But the second question I'll ask is, do you have any desires for this time together? And then we'll both sit with an answer. And sometimes there will be explicit desires, and sometimes there won't. But it's nice to have a space of like, okay, this is what we're both wanting out of the connection. And sometimes I might want 10 things, but we'll only be able to do one, and that's fine. But it just at least it gives a vibe of like what we're both wanting to do or experience, so that it increases the likelihood that the connection moves in that direction. So 1, intentions before. 2, when you meet with the person, share your desires for what you want out of the experience. 3, this one I have found, I haven't found many people that do this outside of facilitated containers, but I find it tremendously useful and interesting. And the idea is to overtly set the culture together. So here's what I mean by that. Every time you are with another person, you are in a 2-person culture with that person. There is a set of norms, there is a space that dictates the way that you act and behave and react, and the types of jokes you tell, and if silence is permissible, and how much play is involved in, etc. And usually in relationships, the norms of interaction, the culture, is not outstated. It's just implicit, and it's invisible, but it's constantly evolving. But what I've found is that you can actually inform the culture of a connection in a lot of ways, frankly. I could do a whole other video on that. But one way to inform the culture of a connection is to simply explicitly state a desired norm. So, for example, if I'm meeting with someone and I don't really have a relationship established with them yet, one norm I will always want to share is that I want space for either of us to state emotions that come up. And I'll just say something like this. I'll say, hey, Lindarina, I know we haven't built our connection too much, and we're just getting to know each other. So I actually wanted to propose a norm. For how we relate with each other. So I'm going to share it and let me know how it lands. The norm I want to propose is that if either of us feel an emotion come up at any point in the conversation, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, I just want to have space to share it. Not that we have to share it every time, but I want us both to feel safe sharing it. So if either of us feels insecure, or something is vulnerable, or sad or afraid, or appreciative or heartwarmed, I'd love to have space for us to share that. How does that land with you? Okay, end scene. The reason I find that really useful is because overtly stating a proposal for a norm in a connection or culture increases the likelihood that that norm will naturally take root. So by sharing that norm up front, it increases the likelihood that that norm will exist in the connection. And that may not be the norm for you. In fact, it probably isn't. Like, maybe the norm for you is around touch, or is around playfulness, or is around how you listen to each other, whatever. And frankly, that would probably be another good thing, is to sit with what norms you want in your different connections. Cool. So that's tip 3. Okay. Step 4 is take pauses to zoom out. So, again, usually, even if you've done all this work up front, you have intentions and desires in the culture set, there's still a possibility that you'll meet, and this is me, this is you, that we'll meet, and the conversation will go somewhere over here, and like maybe neither of us are enjoying it, and like we can try and steer it back. But what I've found is really useful is whether it's with a timer, like every so often to take a pause, that's a pretty like overt way, or just I'm tracking my internal field, and I'm tracking how I'm feeling emotionally and energetically throughout the conversation, and I'm tracking the connection. And if it ever feels like disconnected, or like I'm feeling ungrounded or just weird in any way, then I'll try and pause if I can and just say, hey, I want to pause for a sec. I notice I'm feeling a little disconnected. How are you feeling right now? And that's really useful because here's me and here's you, and here's the connection happening, and we're both having an experience of the connection. And it can be so helpful to pause and zoom out and say, here's my experience of what's happening, and you say, here's my experience of what's happening, so we can both be like, great, we love where it's going, let's keep it up. Or we can say, ooh, actually, something feels off, let's course correct. And this actually gives more agency to steering the connection where you both want it. Because ultimately you're looking for a win-win. You're both looking to get what you want out of the connection. And if you're able to pause at any given moment in the connection, check in with how it's going for both of you, that opens up the possibility of course correcting or doing something different. And I'll also say that just sharing your inner experience with a person creates intimacy with them. And that can be scary for people too, but that is obviously a useful place to go in connection. Step 5, make proposals. Make proposals. So just whatever your impulse wants to do, whatever your inspiration wants to do, if you have an idea like, oh, wouldn't it be fun if we climbed that tree right now? Just propose it. Because here's the thing, if we're hanging out and I make a proposal, you can say yes, and then we do it, and that's great because my desire is being fulfilled and it matches your desire. You can say no, and that's also great because then we can figure out something else to do that matches both our desires. Or you could say like, yes, but I want to change the proposal in this way. And then I can then respond to that with a yes, no, or maybe, or change. And then we can find our mutual yes. But we're only going to find our mutual yes in ways that are exciting if we're both willing to make proposals. So for example, I was at the beach with a friend, and we had been talking a long time, and we're in a really interesting conversation, but I was noticing it was feeling very heady to me, and I wanted to ground. So once we got to the beach, I said, hey, I have a proposal. Would you be game to just both sit next to each other and meditate for 2 minutes, and then for 3 minutes share gratitudes back and forth? And he said, well, I'd be game for that, but I'd like to do just 2 minutes of gratitude. So I made a proposal, and then he made a counter proposal. And so that's what we did. We paused, we meditated 2 minutes, we shared back and forth a gratitude each for 2 minutes, and it was just what I needed, and it helped restabilize the connection. I got there because I took a pause and felt my own emotional state and realized I needed to ground. Then I made a proposal in the moment, and then he altered the proposal, and then we got to this new spot together. And then right after that, I made another in-the-moment proposal, and I was like, cool, thanks, that was great. Are you comfortable if I put my hand on your knee for a moment? And he said yes, and then I did, and we shared a moment of touch, and then I checked in, how was that? Because sometimes touch can evoke a lot for people, and then he shared how it was. And just the point I'm illustrating here is like, connection doesn't just have to be conversation. You can get creative, you can make up activities, you can make up little micro containers, you can make up games in the spot, you can do anything, and it all just starts with, if you feel the impulse of something you want, make the proposal, see what happens, see where it goes, be bold, because desire can be scary. Your desires can be scary, and sometimes it does require courage to share your desires. So let's just go over these 5 tips to really create the connections you want, to get more agency in your connections, and to make them more fulfilling for you and the other person. So 1, set your intentions beforehand. 2, once you meet with the person, both share desires that you want out of the connection. 3, take a moment and share if there's any norms that you want to propose for the culture, 2-person culture with that person. 4, track your emotions and energy throughout, and then do your best to take pauses and check in with the other person and course correct if need be. And then 5, when you ever feel the spark of inspiration, make a proposal. Feel your desire and just let it rip. Make a proposal and see where it takes you guys. All right. That's all I got. I hope that this was useful. And even if you just use one of these tips or just use any of these tips in inspiration for your own strategies in connecting with people, I think that would be great. Yeah, and if any of this resonated, or if you have any feedback for that matter, I would love to know. So please feel free to respond and let me know what's up. All right. Cheers. And hope you enjoyed. Hope you have a magical day. That's all I got. I'll see y'all later.